Number 10. Victory Comics. We touched on this one a titch in part 1 when we talked about how The Boys as a series is disparaging to the comic book myth-making machine. But let's take a closer look. Victory Comics is the company detailing the fake exploits of the superheroes in The Boys universe, publishing them and straddling the line between fiction and reality. While they are not newspapers or even regarded as such, they still are paradoxically viewed as factual in some capacity by those who consume them, with those who have read them feeling they know the true flow of events. Victory Comics as a name very much speaks to the early golden era of comics, and their eventual turn into also being propaganda magazines after the start of World War II. The Boys, despite being a comic, views comics as a bit of a danger, as they can be consumed without thought and provide people with a worldview. Remember, this is just one outlook, though some will claim it is the only one. But in a way, it can deny agency and critical thought, and it can also sometimes conflate correlation with causation. If people were truly all such mindless sheeple, books like The Boys wouldn't exist. Still, makes you think, provokes discussion. Number 9. The adaptation thinks it's new. Now, in the lead up to the Boys series, there has been the usual press tour, the interviews with creators, etc. And one thing that's a little scary about Kripke's interviews is that it seems like it's very much pressing the, oh my god, this is the first dark deconstruction ever. It's an interesting one, and a gory one at that, but it's not the first, not by far. And also what it's saying is not a brand new shocking revelation. Like, hey guys, superheroes are people too, and maybe they're jerks. It's not a stop the presses moment, but hey, I'm a bit of a cynic. Also, people keep comparing The Watchmen and The Boys, and guys, they have very different theses. Just because they both have an assault scene and deconstruct heroes, the deconstructions are very different. Number 8. A defective product. In The Boys universe, as we mentioned in part 1, the Seven, the not Justice League, are essentially bought and paid for by the Vought Corporation, who are using them to advance their own power-grabbing goals. However, what this means is that the Seven are a product. This aspect has actually aged quite well in an influencer age of branding. In fact, it actually plays better, although one has to wonder how so much debauchery would be kept under wraps in the social media age. But I'll suspend my disbelief, I mean, a lot is hidden now. Still, this means that when things go wrong, the Seven are viewed as defective products by their handlers rather than people. Raised in such a warped environment, is it really a wonder they went so wrong? Number 7. Issue 40. So The Boys is divided into story arcs that overall tell an overarching narrative, and is eventually punctuated throughout by miniseries that expand upon the characters or events, or just, well, there to push the boundaries. Looking at you, Herogasm. However, a turning point for the level of depravity is reached in issue 40, when the Homelander receives his blackmail photos and we get to see what's in them. And I can't show you, but I can tell you, babies are eaten. Cannibalism. Are we still monetized? People don't like baby eaters. Just when you thought it couldn't go any higher, yeah, this series is a lot, and some people are not here for it. And it crosses that, you're just doing this to do it threshold. Everybody has a different barrier. They haven't found a movie, book, or anything that could stop me from eating yet. I'm like the boy who couldn't get the shivers, but with gore. Body horror me. Number 6. No origins. So as mentioned, the superheroes are promoted through their comics and other media, and they all have origins similar to those of classic superheroes that we've read about. Here's the thing, not only the Homelanders is fake, all of them are. All the heroes have the same horrible origin. Sort of. At least they're all created in a way that involves Compound V. That compound will give anyone powers. So you too could be a corrupt hero. Rejoice! And also, once it's out there, it can be passed down genetically. So Fantastic Four style, kinda. Number 5. Baby killers. Speaking of children and passing down powers, now these superpowered pregnancies are quite dangerous because sometimes the powers can manifest in the womb. So these powers can actually kill the mother. In fact, spoiler time, that's part of the Butcher's backstory. His wife is torn apart by her superpowered pregnancy. It rips through her womb with its laser vision. He has to smash it to death, and also he has permanent laser burns on his arm. Dark, dark, dark. So these babies and the deaths they cause need to be covered up. Can't let people know, although some of these babies are also the result of assault. Now, since the truth about Compound V and what it does isn't out there, there's just a lot of bad things happening. Superpowered children are terrifying. Franklin Richards' Dark Superman, the movie, aka Brightburn, that's also pretending it hadn't been done a million times as well. Sorry, salty. When people go on to something as groundbreaking and it's about the 28th time it's happened, you know, it can still be good, just don't pretend it's new. Number 4, the female of the species. So the boys aren't all boys, that's just a colloquial term that isn't actually gender specific anymore. It had historical ties to a time when it would be more likely to have been all boys, but even then, there were girls too. So the most deadly member of the boys is the female, and her name is actually a play on the poem The Female of the Species by Rudyard Kipling, written in 1911. And man knows it, knows moreover that the woman that God gave him must command but may not govern, shall enthrall but not enslave him. And she knows because she warns him, and her instincts never fail, that the female of her species is more deadly than the male. So yeah, people underestimate the female, but they shouldn't, because she'll rip your face off and not feel bad about it, because without fail, the female of the species is deadlier than the male. Number 3, homophobia. So the language used in The Boys is a lot by modern standards. I mean, it was a lot back then, but now some people's ears or rather eyes may bleed. It's quite crass, but beyond that, the series actually has some interesting things to say about true prejudice and how people can get caught up in vulgarity and assume that that is where true hate lies, when really it's with the very people who pretend to care and say all the right things. Case in point, the heroes who do all kinds of outreach for LGBTQ+ youth, but only because the company mandates it. Again, it's that concept of perception versus reality, which can be warped in more ways than people think. Ideas are nuanced, not just a one-way street. Number 2, betrayal. So this series has some twists and turns, and oh boy are they twisty. The whole climax before the last arc, well, it's a story breaker for some. There are revelations on both sides, and I'm not going to ruin them because I'm not Kelly. No shade, I also spoil stories all the time. I warned you. Let's just say that some motivations aren't what people thought they were, and not everyone is who they say they are. Am I hyping you up yet? Are you hyped? Number 1, Garth Ennis hates superheroes. So Garth Ennis wrote The Boys, and while he is not here for superheroes, he discussed it during his interviews leading up to his new series. He said, and I quote, "While I regard costume superheroes really with a good deal of suspicion and disdain, so I tended to follow my instincts in that regard. One thing I would say is that in a way that the mainstream world of entertainment has caught up with comic books, people have now been educated to the notion of shared universes, of worlds, of superheroes, of walking out your door one morning and seeing Spider-Man swing past and walking to work and seeing Iron Man battling somebody. I would still be very shocked to see those things. I mean, okay, so why disdain? I mean, yes, but it's a fictional idea. Does he know something we don't? Are they unveiling a real Superman tomorrow? It's okay to like ideas and believe in them, and it's also okay to deconstruct them. So Ennis is a cynic, and The Boys reflects that. It is unchecked cynicism. But if you can, do check it yourself. I mean, it's just one person's look. You can also create your own. Crowdfund it even. Ignore Tom Taylor's Spider-Man when he tells you not to. Yeah, there's an issue of Spider-Man where he's anti-crowdfunding. Form your own opinions. Number 10, this series will out-preach your preacher. Garth Ennis, the creator of The Boys, has garnered quite the reputation for just how graphic and shocking his work can be, with The Boys being the pinnacle for many. However, before that title went to another Ennis series, Preacher. This series was printed under DC's Vertigo imprint, and at the time, from 1995 to 2000, was known for just how many boundaries it pushed. It too has been adapted. Ennis has stated that one of his goals when developing The Boys was to out-preach your preacher, and it's safe to say he succeeded, to the point that DC actually cancelled the book and it was picked up by Dynamite Comics, which Ennis states was the biggest blessing in disguise they could have had. Because at Dynamite, they could go really hardcore. Talking about The Boys can be hard for a YouTuber because the range of what you can show, well, sometimes it would just be a censor bar. Heads crushed, men having sex with asteroids, babies eaten, the whole 9 yards.
In at number 9, a dark deconstruction. When a superhero comic book is published, they usually take it one of two ways. The writer will either use a storyline of deconstruction or reconstruction. Deconstruction is where the comic book or movie adaptation will criticize our ideas of superheroes and really break down the moral complications that come along with that. Reconstruction, on the other hand, is when the narrative builds the heroes back up to the point of admiration and heroism. The Boys go full deconstruction and dive deep into the dark world that exists in the aftermath of superheroes. With superpowers comes super destruction, and sure, the people being saved are happy, but what about everybody else's lives that live in the vicinity?
Soups lose hundreds of people each year to collateral damage.
I can't stop. I can't stop.
Number 8. It plays with realism. Historical realism. As The Boys takes a more realistic look at the myth of the superhero and what role they would play in our world in terms of media and just how it would shape our society and aspirations, it sets its scene in a realistic realm as well, taking a Marvel-esque approach in that history has largely unfolded the same way it has in real life, but it has been impacted greatly by the existence of these supers. This plays out quite interestingly in how the comic tackles retelling 9/11. Yes, it tackles that, which for some was already a step too far. This arc was controversial. In The Boys, the Vought Corporation allows one plane to slip through the net after stopping the first two, so that it can showcase their new premier superhero team, the Seven, and test them in action. The only problem, they're untrained, undisciplined, and some are bullies and cowards. The whole rescue attempt is botched, and ultimately the Homelander forces the plane to crash land into the Brooklyn Bridge, destroying it, making that the monument of destruction left behind by 9/11, though the media covers it up as a victory. That's just one of the many ways the supers changed this world. It's all dark, sad stuff. Not a happy world. Little joy. Except for me.
In at number 7, the UNADAPTABLE series. After AMC's Preacher had wrapped up its 3rd season, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg will take another shot at bringing to life the brilliant work of Garth Ennis. Before the release and success of Preacher, both The Boys and Preacher were considered largely unadaptable. Comic books have a unique space where they can essentially get away with whatever they want. However, when it comes to bringing that to television or the big screen, the censorship boards usually pump the brakes. Both of these comic books have extreme violence and very mature subject matter, but the success of Preacher was so undeniable that it carved out a nice little pathway for shows like The Boys to make it through.
Spank the bastards when they get out of line.
Number 6. Starlight was originally going to have much worse happen to her. One of Ennis' favorite characters while writing the series, or she came to be, was the character of Starlight, or Annie January, a new hero with genuine beliefs in the supers, brought into the team to replace a dead teammate that the team and the media is pretending just retired, by having his corpse reanimated in a zombie-like state, so it can appear in the background of shots sometimes. They keep him in the basement. Yeah. Annie suffers some of the worst the Seven has to offer, from humiliation to sexual assault, but ultimately becomes one of the most well-rounded characters, and one that opens up numerous discussions about faith, personal responsibility, what it means to be good, disillusionment, and more. However, initially, Ennis was just going to have her be there as a punching bag, an example of the evil the Seven do as acted out through a foil, so her treatment was initially going to be much worse. However, once he began writing and the romance that develops in the series began to unfold, he started to think there's much more here and she deserves better, and hence her more fleshed out arc was born.
In at number 5, a Zack Snyder connection. For those of you who are unaware as to who Zack Snyder is, he was the director for Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice, a largely controversial figure in the world of superhero movies, but nonetheless he became a huge inspiration for The Boys showrunner Eric Kripke. The Boys will explore the violent and arrogant superheroes called the Seven that basically have full control over the city. Picture corrupt cops with superpowers and you're pretty much there. The sociopathic Seven in the series begin to approve their very own movie deals within the television show, and Kripke says this is where the Snyder aesthetic comes through. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Eric said every time they make a superhero thing, they're making a Zack Snyder movie. In the stuff that Vought makes, we were inspired more by DC than Marvel. The Marvel stuff is actually reasonably grounded, but the DC stuff tends to get a little pretentious, and we wanted the Vought superhero movies to be a little full of themselves.
Like a bunch of f***ing twins. We got a f***ing job to do.
I'm invincible!
Number 4. The real world has altered this adaptation. Now, things are products of their time. It is inevitable that the real world ekes into works. What varies is the degree. Some people are trying to make something more timeless, while others strive for something more topical or relevant. Eric Kripke has been quite candid in discussions about The Boys, and how factors like the 2016 election and the Me Too movement have altered how they have adapted, scripted, and shot scenes. He has been particularly forthcoming about some changes to Annie's plot, as he wanted to handle it respectably, and not have it be shocking for shocking's sake. Firstly, shots fired at Ennis, and The Boys' shock factor actually has a point, because comics aren't normally that brutal. It's a contrast and purposeful, but I digress. Annie's story is a powerful one, but depending upon how it is presented, it can change the core tenet of what the series is critiquing. In the comic, the fact that Annie doesn't go public about what happens to her is largely because she believes in the myth of what superheroes are and doesn't want to shatter it. Coming out of that and realizing that these people are changing her, warping her, and what has occurred and what she has done, and Annie has agency and is very candid with herself is a big part of the parallel between the Sevens and the boys' stories. Kripke was quick to point out in this she can come forward and has a voice, which again, shots fired, she had one in the comics. However, this could be well presented, and while it hasn't aired yet, so it could be brilliant and I could love it more than the comics. What's scary here, for me at least, is I just clench up whenever someone says it's relevant. I just flashed all those relevant works from the 80s and 90s that have aged poorly. Remember when American Beauty was relevant? Remember when Crash was topical and healed the world? So do I. I'm scared.
In at number 3, no heroes. This is definitely not your average superhero show by a long shot. In fact, there's no heroes at all. All you have is unlikable good guys that are conceited and self-involved, coming into conflict with a rogue CIA group whose mission is to destroy the quote-unquote good guys. Kripke has said himself that while he's a fan of Marvel movies, he believes a myth of superheroes always being noble has sprung up and needs to be criticized. The show is meant to expose superheroes and make audience realize that just because we're handed superpowers doesn't mean we won't use them for our own interests and motivations. They blow that perspective of heroes being the good guys right out of the water when they show Huey's girlfriend being torn to shreds by a super who's too busy to care.
Number 2, it takes on comic books. This piggybacks a little bit off of Johnny's last point. So The Boys is a comic, but it's also very critical of the comic industry, or more so the mythology industry, the act of putting ideas on pedestals. There's a running theme throughout the book that this is a way for people to avoid the responsibility of having to change the world themselves, by believing that some magical person is just around the corner coming to save them. Basically the anti-Superman thought process, cause that one is our myths give us hope and keep us strong. Layers, it's deep. It's not just shocking to be shocking. That creepy interview has me shook. I'm scared. Of the boys' arcs, one of the most off-putting to some is Herogasm, which, oh man, that one. Don't start with that one. I can barely show you anything, so much boobs and nakedness and just everything. Herogasm is basically an exercise in superhero debauchery and the Seven's descent. Read at your own risk. I personally love Herogasm, but I just love the boys, 100% biased. Read the omnibuses, they're on sale, not sponsored.
Last but not least, in our number 1 spot, Supernatural. As you know by now, Eric Kripke is the showrunner for The Boys, and Kripke is known for his work on the television show Supernatural, which was picked up by the WB. Eric had spent nearly 10 years developing the series Supernatural, and says that he has always been fascinated with urban legends ever since he was a child. Although whenever you're dealing with a network as large as the WB, creators often feel handcuffed with what they're allowed to do. The show went through several phases before becoming the final 14-season run that we received, and that being said, now that The Boys has been picked up by Amazon Prime, the cuffs have come off. Kripke said, as I mentioned before, that this time he will be doing a full deconstruction of not just superheroes, but entitled celebrities and the absolute worst of our politics.
Number 10, he was created by Nazis. The Homelander is the beacon of hope of the Boys universe, the number 1 superhero. There's just one problem. Everything about him is a lie, down to his origin. While the public believes he was a crashed alien, in reality he was the result of a corporate experiment by Vought Industries, who was using Compound V, an experimental serum created by Nazi scientists to attempt to create super soldiers. To achieve this, they injected pregnant women with an excessive amount of the serum to see what the results they could produce were, one of which was the Homelander, though his mother died in the process. The Homelander as a hero has super strength, laser vision, enhanced senses, and vocal cords, all the things you would expect. Number 9, he has no training. Throughout The Boys, we are able to witness different time periods and the characters at these points, which reveals the sad reality that the Homelander, and indeed all of the supers, are a construction largely created as a bid for corporate control. Corptocracy time. There are lots of conspiracies in this comic, but because of all of this, the heroes are really more for show, and the situations they are sent into are more PR stunts, even though they are actual situations. But the thing is, they're not trained for it at all. If they do well, perfect, but if they mess up horribly, that's fine too. You get to witness some horrible botched rescue attempts and missions in this series, and just witness how ineffectual of a leader the Homelander is. During one rescue attempt with 9/11 ties, he yells so loudly at the passengers on a plane to shut up that he bursts their eardrums. Number 8, he has no identity. A key part of so many superhero stories is that duality of identity, that balance between hero or public persona and the private one. It's the foundation that many stories are predicated upon. Even Superman has his fair share of identity drama. However, the Homelander has no identity, not even really a name. Though he has been called John, but no one is sure if that's really it. With no counterbalance, it works narratively to showcase how distant from the rest of the world the Homelander really is. He has no ties, no friends. friends. No lovers. Not proper ones anyway. He is simply the Homelander and all that entails. There is no one to be held accountable because the myth of the Homelander reigns supreme, leaving him in a way identityless. And that's a scary concept. Number 7. He's a deconstruction of Superman. Now if you're coming from our other video, you know this point. The Homelander is a clear examination, subversion, and deconstruction of Superman, but it goes beyond sharing the same powers and a similar-ish backstory. Instead, this story fully takes on the concept of what happens if you change Superman's environment, just as many Elseworld Superman stories have done, most notably Superman Red Son. The Homelander is raised by corporations and told he must be a hero, isolated and kept separate from the very humans he is meant to protect. He was raised in a lab and experimented upon, which in a way makes some of the small moments of genuineness he has a bit of a surprise. It showcases how that human element to Superman is what makes him a hero or villain. As deprived from it and manipulated by all around him, he falls, and falls hard. It's also good that this is another imprint, because Clark putting his hand through the Joker's chest in Injustice after he was tricked into killing Lois and their unborn baby is one thing, but all the things you see the Homelander do, people wouldn't recover from seeing Superman do those things. Number 6. Everyone loves him. One of the things The Boys plays with is how easily taken in the public can be by the PR machine, which means that no matter what the Homelander does, no one ever hears about it, so the people love him, and even the people who do see it happen get paid off. What also helps with this are comics, which depict official versions of events in this universe which people latch onto. Belief in the myth of Homelander can inspire, and he's inspired people to become heroes only to have their illusions shattered. This is when they enter the actual world of superheroes and see what it's really like, an occurrence that can be paralleled by many real-world industries. Just the concept that someone so vile could be so loved, upsetting. And yet, we know what happens. Number 5. He's a rapist. This may seem kinda low for some people, but for those who've read it, you'll know why it's halfway. As there are no consequences for any of his actions, the Homelander abuses his authority on every level, and that includes sexually. For example, when initiating new recruits, he makes their final test a blowjob. So you may be wondering, why are there no consequences? Well, the reason is the companies and governments want the supes to be distracted, so that they don't realize the powers that they have, and what they could do if they went off on their own. So to keep them distracted, they have them invested in their own squabbles and hedonisms. It's a valid tactic, and well, it works for a while. But just for a while. Number 4. He's insane. Side note, since I started watching Legion, I can't say that without saying it like Melanie Bird in season 2. He's insane. But seriously, the Homelander is having a breakdown. All of the things he's done, coupled with blackmail images featuring stuff he doesn't remember doing, all of this causes his mental state to deteriorate further and further until he inevitably snaps. What's scary about this is that so many people witness it happening, but through a combination of not caring, or not being able to do anything because of how powerful the Homelander is, he's kind of on an inevitable course for supervillainy. No holds barred villainy. Heads off, babies eaten, so many things. Number 3. He led an uprising. So the Homelander is the leader of the Seven, the Boys' universe's version of the Justice League, and so when he goes rogue and decides that they need to start doing things for themselves, forget their corporate handlers and the government, which they weren't really worried about in the first place, he has a whole group of supers at his disposal, and their lower level teams. Because of course, he is still an example, a dark example, but still something people follow. And this uprising goes hard, like decapitating the president, climactic battle in the Oval Office hard. Number 2. The Seven. So the Seven is made up of the world's 7 greatest superheroes, but in reality their name heralds something far more sinister. The Seven refers to the 7 women used as broodmares in their super soldier serum experiment. The 7 were women who wouldn't be missed, quote unquote, and because of their creation process, the 7 are more powerful than any of the other heroes, which also increases the amount of damage they do, accidentally. As mentioned, despite their heroic veneers, they aren't very good in crisis situations. The 7 actually had an agreement with the Boys pre-series to leave each other alone, but well, obviously that didn't work out. The 7 are marketed by the Vought Corporation and care far more about their marketing rights and cuts that they make off of merchandise than anything else, with the Homelander getting the most. Number 1. He could have been a real hero. So this is probably more sad than scary. It's the fact that the Homelander could have been the hero he wanted to be, without all of the influences and the blackmail and the glitz and the glamour. With some real support, he could have been a Superman. Near the series' conclusion, he realizes that ultimately the decision to not be that, while partially, okay, a large part of it was his own doing, but without interference, he might have been the person everyone thinks or thought he was. That's really upsetting. I mean, no sympathy for the Homelander at all, but it's nuanced. While the goal of this series was to out-preach Preacher, which it definitely did, there are also a lot of layers to the character motivations. In short, I'm saying it's still worth reading, and I spoiled as little as I could. And I'm so excited for this series.